The individual who moves through the world with a heightened resonance does not merely possess a cheerful disposition, but rather inhabits a state of profound psychic integration where the boundaries between the ego and the collective unconscious become thin and permeable. The first unusual sign of such a person is an uncanny magnetism for synchronicity, wherein the external world seems to rearrange its physical events to mirror their internal symbolic state, suggesting a collapse of the wall between mind and matter. Secondly, they exhibit a disturbing degree of transparency, possessing a gaze that feels less like observation and more like a mirror. Because they have courageously integrated their own shadow, they radiate an authenticity that compels the hidden truths of others to rise involuntarily. Finally, these individuals demonstrate a peculiar detachment from the collective hysteria of the masses, maintaining an internal equilibrium that is not born of apathy, but of a deep-rooted connection to the archetypal self. This detachment allows them to navigate the chaos of the mundane world while remaining anchored in a timeless, numinous reality, acting as a silent conduit for the psychic evolution of the species. The phenomenon of synchronicity, which serves as the primary hallmark of a high-vibrational state, represents a profound rupture in our conventional understanding of linear causality and the perceived wall between the subjective mind and the objective world. When an individual achieves a certain level of psychic density or vibration, they no longer move through the environment as a separate, isolated ego, but rather as a localized expression of a much larger, interconnected field of meaning where the distinction between in here and out there begins to dissolve into a singular, numinous tapestry. This alignment is not merely a string of happy accidents or the result of a cognitive bias like the Boder-Meinhof phenomenon. Instead, it is a structural resonance where the psyche's internal symbols find an immediate and undeniable physical counterpart in the external landscape. This occurs because the high-vibrational individual has tapped into what might be called the jus mundus, the unitary world where matter and spirit are revealed as two aspects of the same underlying reality. In this state, a specific dream, a recurring thought, or an intense emotional realization does not remain confined to the private theater of the mind, but instead acts as a gravitational well that pulls relevant physical events toward it. You might find that at the exact moment you confront a long, buried internal truth, a stranger speaks that very truth aloud, or a specific animal appears in an unlikely setting, or a book falls from a shelf opened to the precise page required for your evolution. These occurrences are the universe's way of acknowledging that the individual is no longer resisting the flow of the collective unconscious, but is instead vibrating in harmony with its deepest archetypal currents. This state of objective connection implies that the individual has moved beyond the ego, will, the frantic, superficial striving to control life through logic and force, and has instead surrendered to the self, will, which operates through a deeper, non-linear logic. To the observer, this person seems lucky or blessed, but in reality, they have simply removed the psychic blockages, the repressed shadows, the rigid intellectual defenses, and the habitual anxieties that typically insulate us from the web of universal meaning. As these blockages fall away, the person's presence becomes a catalyst for meaning, turning the mundane world into a living oracle where every encounter and every delay is laden with significant purpose. This heightened state of resonance suggests that the higher the vibration, the more the physical world behaves like a dream, responding to the dreamer's intent and state of being with a fluidity that defies the laws of classical physics. It is a terrifying yet beautiful realization that we are not merely spectators of reality, but participants in its constant, spontaneous creation. The individual who experiences frequent synchronicity is essentially a bridge, a conduit through which the invisible world of meaning breaks into the visible world of form, proving that the soul is not a prisoner within the body, but is a field of influence that extends to the very edges of existence. This objective connection serves as a constant feedback loop. As the individual grows in consciousness, the external world mirrors that growth with increasingly complex and poetic coincidences, guiding the traveler toward an ever-deepening integration of the totality of being. At this level of vibration, the person understands that there are no others and no elsewheres, only a continuous, shimmering dance of energy where every thought ripples across the cosmos and every event is a message from the depths of one's own heart. This creates a sense of profound belonging and safety that is independent of external circumstances, for even in the midst of chaos, the high-vibrational person recognizes the hidden order and the silent dialogue being conducted between their soul and the world. They become a walking testament to the fact that the universe is not a cold, mechanical void, but a conscious, responsive entity that speaks to those who have the ears to hear and the frequency to match its song. The more one inhabits this space of synchronicity, the more the ego is humbled, realizing it is not the master of the house, but a guest in a magnificent, self-organizing temple where every brick and every beam is alive with the same intelligence that beats within the human breast. This is the ultimate evidence of a high vibration, the total collapse of loneliness into a state of cosmic intimacy, where the individual's life becomes a masterpiece of spontaneous choreography, directed by a wisdom that far exceeds the reach of the rational intellect. It is the transition from being a victim of fate to being a co-author of destiny, where the pen is held by both the human hand and the divine wind, writing a story that is as much about the stars as it is about the soil, weaving together the disparate threads of time, space, and spirit into a single, unbreakable cord of light that connects the most fleeting thought to the most ancient star. The second hallmark of the high-vibrational individual is a radical, almost unsettling transparency that stems from the successful integration of the shadow, a process that dissolves the rigid, artificial mask of the persona and replaces it with a unified psychic presence. To understand this state, one must recognize that the average person survives by maintaining a carefully curated facade, a psychological skin designed to win social approval while hiding the darker, more primitive, or socially unacceptable aspects of the self, the jealousy, the rage, the unfulfilled desires, within a subterranean vault of the unconscious. However, the individual of high resonance has undertaken the agonizing labor of descending into that vault, confronting the monsters residing there and shaking hands with them, thereby reclaiming the vital energy that was previously spent on repression. When this internal war ends, the outward result is a person who no longer radiates the jagged, dissonant frequencies of self-deception. Instead, they emit a frequency that is clear and penetrative because it is no longer refracted through the prism of a lie. This transparency is not a deliberate performance of honesty or a confession of sins, but rather a biological and psychic fact of their being. They have nothing left to hide from themselves, and consequently, they have nothing to hide from the world. When you stand in the presence of such a person, you may feel an immediate sense of exposure, not because they are judging you, but because their lack of a shadow mask acts as a powerful, silent mirror that reflects your own unintegrated fragments back to you. This is why high-vibrational people are often described as having eyes that see through you. They are simply seeing the world through a lens that has been scrubbed clean of the projections and defensive distortions that usually cloud human perception. This state of being creates a profound aura of authenticity that can be both deeply comforting and intensely provocative. The small self of others, which thrives on the games of social masks, feels threatened by this nakedness, while the deeper self of others feels an irresistible pull toward it. This transparency acts as a psychic solvent, melting away the pretenses in the room and forcing a level of intimacy that most are unaccustomed to navigating. Because this individual has accepted their own capacity for darkness, they possess a unique kind of grace that does not recoil from the darkness in others, creating a safe container for truth to emerge without the fear of moralistic condemnation. They move through life with a strange, fluid ease, as they are no longer carrying the heavy, invisible luggage of repressed trauma or unacknowledged shame. This lightness of being is what others perceive as a high vibration. It is the literal reduction of psychic friction. In the absence of internal conflict, the life force or libido flows unimpeded, manifesting as a magnetic vitality and a terrifyingly beautiful clarity. This individual does not need to speak of their values or their spiritual achievements, for their very existence is a broadcast of their internal state. They become a walking invitation for everyone they encounter to drop their own masks and join them in the terrifying freedom of the truth. This integration also grants them a peculiar kind of invulnerability, for one cannot be blackmailed by a secret they have already made public to themselves, nor can they be insulted by a shadow they have already embraced as part of their own soul's geography. They have reached a state of individuation where the ego is no longer a tyrant but a servant to the totality of the psyche, resulting in a presence that feels ancient and youthful simultaneously. They embody the paradox of being fully human, flawed, earthy, and complex, while simultaneously acting as a vessel for the numinous, because they have realized that the holy is not the opposite of the profane, but its completion. By refusing to participate in the collective conspiracy of silence regarding the human shadow, they become a source of profound psychic healing for their environment, acting as a lightning rod that grounds the chaotic energies of those around them into the earth of conscious awareness. This transparency is the ultimate form of power, not a power over others, but the power of being so thoroughly yourself that your presence alone becomes a revolutionary act, stripping away the illusions of the world and leaving only the shimmering, raw reality of the present moment. The third distinguishing attribute of the high-vibrational individual is a profound and peculiar detachment from the collective hysteria of the masses, a state of being that manifests not as a cold indifference or a withdrawal from society, but as a robust psychic immunity to the contagious currents of fear, outrage, and ideological possession that characterize the modern landscape. To understand this quality, one must recognize that the majority of human consciousness is caught in the web of the participation mystique, a primitive psychological state where the individual's identity is blurred into the group mind, making them susceptible to the tidal waves of emotion that sweep through the collective unconscious. However, the person of high resonance has achieved a degree of individuation that acts as a ballast, allowing them to remain upright while the sea of public opinion tosses others to and fro. They have found the still point of the turning world within their own psychic architecture. This detachment is rooted in the realization that most societal conflicts are merely the externalization of unintegrated internal shadows, and that by refusing to be drawn into the polarized us versus them narratives of the day, they are preserving the clarity necessary to see the archetypal patterns hidden beneath the surface of the news cycle. While the world screams for reaction, this individual responds with a silence that is pregnant with meaning, for they are anchored in a reality that is older and deeper than the fleeting anxieties of the temporal ego. They perceive the spirit of the times as a superficial layer of existence and instead live in alignment with the spirit of the depths, which recognizes the cyclical nature of human suffering and the necessary role of chaos in the birth of new consciousness. This gives them a strange, almost eerie calm in the face of crisis. Where others see the end of the world, the high-vibrational person sees the inevitable decomposition of an old psychic structure, making way for a more integrated form. This equilibrium is not a defense mechanism, but a byproduct of having relocated the center of gravity from the fragile ego to the objective self, which is untroubled by the storms of the periphery. Consequently, they do not derive their sense of meaning from being right in a social context or from belonging to a specific tribe, but from their own direct, unmediated contact with the numinous. This makes them essentially unhackable by the machinery of propaganda and social engineering, as their internal compass is set to a frequency that the noise of the world cannot reach. In their presence, one feels a cooling of the blood and a quieting of the mind, as they provide a living example of how to be in the world, but not of it. They act as a stabilizing force in any environment, a silent observer whose very lack of reactivity forces others to confront their own frantic compulsions. This detachment allows for a higher form of compassion, one that is not sentimental or reactive, but objective and transformative, because they can see the person behind the mask of the partisan or the victim. By refusing to participate in the collective insanity, they preserve the seeds of sanity for the future, standing as a bridge between the decaying structures of the past and the emergent possibilities of the soul. Their life becomes a meditative act of defiance against the gravity of the mundane, proving that it is possible to inhabit a physical body while keeping one's consciousness rooted in the eternal, thereby serving as a lighthouse for those lost in the fog of the collective mind. The fourth and perhaps most subtle sign of a high-vibrational state is the manifestation of a numinous influence, a phenomenon where the individual becomes a spontaneous catalyst for transformation in others, not through active persuasion or the exertion of will, but through the sheer weight of their psychological presence. This quality suggests that the individual has become a hollow, doubt vessel for the life force, allowing the primordial energies of the collective unconscious to flow through them without the usual interference of a grasping, terrified ego. When a person reaches this level of integration, they carry an atmosphere, a temenos, or sacred circle, that follows them into every mundane interaction, creating a field of resonance that compels the souls of those nearby to vibrate in sympathy. This is the stage of the lepes, or the philosopher's stone in the psychological sense, where the base lead of common human experience has been transmuted into a golden, radiant authority that requires no title or social standing to be felt. To encounter such an individual is to experience a sudden, involuntary shift in one's own internal architecture. The petty concerns of the ego seem to wither in their presence, and the deeper, dormant questions of the soul begin to stir with a restless, vital urgency. This influence is often non-verbal and operates beneath the threshold of conscious awareness, acting as a form of psychic induction, where the higher frequency of the integrated individual entrains the dissonant frequencies of those around them. People may find themselves confessing long-held secrets, weeping without knowing why, or experiencing sudden flashes of insight simply by being in the same room as this person. For the high-vibrational individual serves as a living bridge to the transpersonal realm. They do not do anything to achieve this effect. Rather, it is the result of their own radical self-acceptance and their alignment with the objective self, which radiates a light that exposes the shadows and illuminates the potential in everyone they meet. This numinous quality is the ultimate proof that the individual has moved beyond the persona and has become a genuine individual, one who is undivided and therefore possesses a terrifying and beautiful integrity. This influence acts as a spiritual leaven in the heavy dough of society, quietly raising the consciousness of the collective by providing a template for what a fully realized human being can be. They become a source of mana, or spiritual power that is not sought after, but is naturally accorded to them by the unconscious of others, who recognize on a primal level that this person has survived the descent into the abyss and returned with the fire of the gods. Such individuals do not seek followers or crave the spotlight, for the need for external validation has been extinguished in the fires of their own inner transformation. They are content to be a silent sun, warming the cold corners of the world through the simple, profound act of existing in a state of total, unadulterated truth. This numinous influence is the final stage of the work, where the boundaries of the individual life are surpassed, and the person becomes a permanent feature of the spiritual landscape, a beacon that reminds all who see it that the journey from the darkness of ignorance to the light of consciousness is not only possible, but is the very purpose of our existence. By merely being, they provide a silent answer to the deepest cries of the human heart, demonstrating that when one has the courage to face the totality of their own psyche, they become a conduit for a grace that is as ancient as the stars and as intimate as the breath, turning the desert of modern life into a garden of infinite meaning.